I married the emperor's sister's sweetheart. On the wedding night, Ji Wenchen wanted to remain faithful to his sister and was unwilling to touch me. But I never imagined that someone had put a strong drug in the wine he and I drank together. In the middle of the night, he couldn't hold back any longer and came to my bed.
1.
When he woke up the next day, Ji Wenchen looked very miserable. He jumped up from the bed. He pointed at me with a trembling hand and a look of disbelief on his face. How could I? His expression of unbearable pain was as if he had lost the most important chastity of a woman. I tied my clothes calmly while saying, I will not remember what happened last night. Master Ji, just pretend nothing happened. Having said that, I yawned. He called Xia Ian, held her hand, and went to the dining room for dinner. My relaxed look actually confused Ji Wenchen. He followed me out, holding his breath, and sat opposite me. After a long time, he raised his red and swollen eyes and looked at me angrily. After I drank the wedding wine, I felt hot and aroused. Someone must have done something to me. No matter what, you are still a princess. You knew that my heart was not with you, but you insisted on marrying me. Why did you use such a dirty trick to get me? I raised my head and glanced at him calmly, then continued to deal with the porridge in the bowl. Seeing me like this, he became even angrier. When he glared at me, his eyes seemed to be blazing with fire. Nangong Shu, even if you tried your best to break up Jingle and Ji Wenchen, will never be able to show you the slightest affection as you wish in this lifetime. I finished my breakfast in no time. Raise your eyes. Are you done? Now that you have finished speaking, come with me to the palace. Ji Wenchen punched the cotton and had no place to vent his anger. I could only stamp my feet in hatred. I got into the carriage by myself. He glanced at him and said coldly, Today is the day to return to the parents' home. If you don't come with me, my father will blame you, or even the Ji family, but it will have nothing to do with me. He hammered his fist into a nearby pillar. He was cursing something angrily. After all, he didn't have the courage, so he got on the carriage in a daze. But even though he got on the carriage, he deliberately sat half a meter away from me. The look in his eyes when he stared at me was always full of vigilance, as if I would eat him alive. I sneered. He closed his eyes and began to take a nap.
2.
When he arrived at the gate of Fingi Palace, Ji Wenchen's eyes were already shining and he looked dazed. My mind had already flown to Jingle, who lived in Fingi Palace. I grabbed his sleeve. Lowering his voice, he warned him, No matter what you think, this is Fingi Palace. Don't do anything out of line. He looked up and glared at me arrogantly and defensively. I know my limits. In the Fingi Palace, the queen took me aside and chatted with me in an intimate manner about family matters. When he came, he gave me some treasures. Ji Wenchen had been following me silently. But when I walked out of Fingi Palace with a gift from the queen, he was gone.
My heart sank.
Xia Yi, where is the young horse? Did you see where he went? Xia Yi said ignorantly. Just now, the young man said that he wanted to go for a walk in the imperial gardens, and he didn't even let Xiao and I go with him. My heart was tense, and I hurried to the imperial garden. Sure enough, from a distance, I could see two figures hidden among the brilliant flowers. It was my imperial sister Jingle and Ji Wenchen. I stood outside the flowers for a long time. The two of them were busy pouring out their hearts to each other, and Jingle even had half of her body buried in Ji Wenchen's arms, crying so hard that her body was shaking. Ji Wenchen hugged her tightly, tears in his eyes. What a pair of bittersweet lovers who were separated. I raised the corners of my lips in self-mockery. I waited until I saw the patrolling guards coming from a distance before I let out a loud cough. Ji Wenchen saw me and hurriedly let go of Jingle. But he did not forget to tidy up Jingle's appearance and even reached out to lift the fine hair in front of her temples. I chuckled. I didn't mean to disturb you, but look, there are guards over there. Ji Wenchen's eyes turned cold, and he looked at me with disgust and ridicule. Princess, this is the price you have to pay for marrying me. He walked up behind me, looking respectful. In fact, it was malicious and sarcastic. Jingle looked at me, very indignant. Nangong Shu, you stole Aiken, and you still have the nerve to show up in the palace? If I were you, I would find a rope and tie myself to death. I couldn't help but burst out laughing. Nangong Jingle, you have to restrain yourself. I can't hold you back. But now I'm going to take my stallion and go. I took a few steps and said to Ji Wenchun in a cold voice, "What are you still standing there for? Do you want everyone in the palace to know that you just married the third princess and you are having a secret meeting with the fifth princess?" Ji Wenchun stared at me, seeming to hate me to the extreme. But he could only swallow his anger and go with me. Jingle stomped his feet hard on the ground, then ran away quickly, wiping his tears. I whispered to Ji Wenchun, "I pretended not to see what happened just now, but I have to go see my father later, so you have to play the role of a loving husband for me." He gritted his teeth and clenched his fists tightly. "Nangong Shu, you will be punished." "Retribution?" I sneered. "Ji Wenchun, if it weren't for me, my father would have punished you by now. Think carefully, who should be punished?" 3. A few months ago at a palace banquet, Ji Wenchun got drunk and it was unknown what had happened. He actually walked out under the influence of alcohol, knelt in the center of the hall, and in front of my father and all the ministers, asked to marry the queen's biological daughter, my younger sister Nangong Jingle. In fact, Ji Wenchun knew in his heart that even though he and Jingle loved each other, he would not agree unless it was you. But the Ji family had been a military family for generations, and they held high positions of power. His father, General Ji, had an army of 200,000 in his hands. It is absolutely impossible for my father to marry his legitimate daughter Jingle to him, allowing the Ji family to have another huge support from the clan. He was just taking a gamble and openly proposing for marriage in the hall. For the sake of Ji's family, the emperor might not easily reject him. "I and the fifth princess are in love with each other, and I beg your majesty to grant us marriage." As expected, as soon as he said this, his father's face quickly darkened. He forced a smile. Senhen's eyes swept over Ji Wenchun in the hall. "Master Ji, what did you just say?" Ji Wenchun's legs were trembling. Jingle, who was sitting next to the queen, already had an anxious look on his face, with tears in his eyes. If the queen had not stretched out a hand and held her down on the chair, she would have rushed out and knelt with Ji Wenchun to beg her father for a marriage. Ji Wenchun's body also began to tremble due to nervousness. Your Majesty, Your Majesty." I was sitting in a corner drinking a glass of wine, but out of the corner of my eye I saw Jingle had broken free from the queen's hand and stood up from the chair. My father most abhors marriages between powerful officials. If she really asked for a marriage, the consequences are disastrous.
Primer Malasya.
In full view of everyone, she knelt beside Ji Wenchun. As for the queen, she finally grabbed Jingle's hand tightly. "Father, please forgive me. Just now, Master Ji asked to marry Princess Shu. Your Majesty, I and young Master Ji are in love with each other, and I beg your Majesty to grant us marriage." As soon as these words came out, the expressions of the people present changed unpredictably. Only my father's frown relaxed. "Really, here? When did you meet Master Ji? How come your father didn't know? In that case, I will help you achieve your goal and marry you to Master Ji." He gave me an approving look. I understand what he means. I am just the daughter of a minor noble, and my mother has long passed away, but I am still a princess. Giving him a marriage with Ji sure happened to restrain him and also cut off his possibility of getting help from his wife's family. Couldn't be better. Ji Wenchun looked at me in shock. After a long time, he shuddered all over. My eyes are much clearer now. He seemed to have sobered up from his drunkenness. "Your Majesty, I am referring to the fifth princess." I gave him a warning look. He was so frightened by me that he just kept silent. Before he could speak again, I kowtowed to my father and expressed my gratitude.
"Raise your head again."
Jingle, with tear-stained eyes, gave me a look filled with hatred. Ji Wenchun stared at me, his eyes full of resentment.
"I sighed deeply."
I knew that from now on, both she and Ji Wenchun would probably blame me. However, in order to save Ji Wenchun's life and future, It is also to repay the queen for her care and concern for me when I was young, and for fulfilling her duties as the mistress of the harem. That's all I can do.
4.
No matter how stupid Ji Wenchen is, he should know why I rashly asked for a marriage proposal at that time. Unfortunately, he is even more of a fool than I thought. Probably, it was because he was the only son of General Ji and was raised by the Queen Mother herself in the palace since he was a child that he became so arrogant and impulsive. Before entering Changchun Palace, I held his hand. He was stunned for a moment, then he exerted all his strength and struggled desperately to loosen himself. I sneered. Ji Wenchen, do you think your father isn't suspicious enough of the Ji family? He glared at me hatefully. In the end, there was no more struggle. When my father saw how affectionate he and I were, he seemed very pleased. Shuer is here. Seeing that you and your husband are so in love with each other, I feel that I have done my duty to your mother in the afterlife. When he talked about my mother, I couldn't help but feel my eyes turn red. Trying hard to suppress the sourness, he said with a smile, "Thank you, father, for making Chen Lang and I happy."
Ji Wenchen sneered beside me.
Nangong Shu, I'm about to throw up the lunch I had yesterday. I toasted my father, covered my lips with the wine glass, and said to him coldly, "Shut up." After the banquet, my father summoned me to use study alone. The first sentence was like a thunderbolt. "Shuer, are you and Ji Wenchen really in love with each other? Why did my people hear that he and Jingle had a secret meeting in the Imperial Garden for a long time this morning?" His gaze shot towards me like a sharp sword. I am now wondering if Ji Shu really has rebellious intentions. I bent over and knelt on the ground. In the hot summer, I feel a slight chill on my body.
5.
Coming out of the palace, I took a few quick steps and walked ahead. Ji Wenchen was still looking around along the way. Not seeing Jingle or the people beside her, he lowered his head in disappointment. I gave him a joking look. "Why are you still thinking about Jingle?" As soon as Jingle was mentioned, he became angry again. If it weren't for you, if it weren't for me, would you have been able to marry Jingle? I retorted. He wanted to refute me, but he had to admit that I was right. So he sat in the carriage and sulked for a long time. The carriage traveled for a while, and it was getting dark. I played with the white jade bracelet the queen gave me in the night light coming in from outside, while pretending to be casual. "Ji Wenchen, go and persuade your father to hand over the tiger talisman that can command 50,000 Northwest Army troops to the Emperor, okay?" This sentence is the result of my careful consideration along the way. The words of rebuke from my father are still ringing in my ears. The matter of Jingle has already made my father suspicious. 50,000 soldiers is the best way I can think of to temporarily resolve his anger. Moreover, even without the 50,000 Northwestern Army, General Ji still had more than 100,000 soldiers under his command. For him, the foundation was not shaken. Ji Wenchen glared at me in disbelief. "Nangong Shu, are you crazy? Those are soldiers trained by my father himself. Why should we hand them over?" I frowned and looked at him mockingly. "Ji Wenchen, I thought you were a person who knew the big picture. You were hugging and cuddling with Jingle in the Imperial Garden today. Do you think your father is blind? You will only be happy if I have to punish you, Ji, for forming a clique for personal gain and raising troops for your own benefit, right?" Ji Wenchen's face turned red and white. He suddenly opened the car curtain and shouted loudly outside, "Driver, stop." The driver asked me anxiously, "Princess, stop." I glanced at Ji Wenchen, who looked like he wanted to eat me alive. He said sarcastically, "Please stop. I don't want to go back to the princess's mansion today. He has his own place to go." As soon as the carriage stopped, Ji Wenchen jumped out. Xia, he was a little uneasy. "Princess, the horse." I calmly put the white jade bracelet back into my jewel bag. "Don't worry about him."
6.
10 days later, Ji Wenchen appeared at the gate of the princess's mansion with a stern face. As soon as I saw his untidy beard, I knew that he had returned to his original residence, Ji Mansion, in the past few days. However, bad news came from the palace yesterday. He couldn't sit still in Ji's mansion anymore, so he went back to the princess's mansion with a flattering look on his face. I asked the waiter at the door to let him in. As soon as he came in, he started barking like a mad dog. Nangong Shu, what's going on? My father is defending the western border well. Why did the emperor issue 3 imperial decrees to replace the candidate for the general of Jinshi? I drank my tea by myself. After a long while, when his face turned red with anxiety, he laughed coldly. A few days ago, I told you to write a letter to your father as soon as possible overnight. You must hand over the tiger talisman to survive this ordeal. You don't want to listen? He was stunned for a moment, and it took him a long time to react. He walked towards me with a stern tone. Well, is it too late for me to write to my father now? I gave him a sidelong glance coldly. Are you scared now? He walked up to me and pulled my sleeve. Nangong Shu, I misunderstood you a few days ago. I apologize to you. Can you go before the emperor and plead for my father? I moved my hand away. I am just a princess of a noble family. I have little power. You should not count on me. A trace of panic flashed across Ji Wenchen's face. Nangong Shu, I am your husband. I will rise and fall with you. Seeing that I still had a cold face, he ignored him. He gritted his teeth and hesitated to speak several times. Don't you want to take me away from Jingle and make me your husband? At worst, I'll just serve you in bed. I gave him a mocking look. Ji Wenchen, who do you think you are? There are so many men who can walk on 2 legs in this world. Do I really need you to serve me in bed? He was deflated. What do you want me to do in order for you to save the Ji family and my father? I drank the tea in one gulp. He pulled out a tiger talisman from his sleeve like a magic trick. Ji Wenchen's eyes widened. Isn't this my father's Northwest Army tiger talisman? Ji Wenchen jumped out of the car and left angrily. I knew I couldn't count on him from now on. He wrote 5 letters in a row and ordered people to send them to the border on fast horses day and night. Explain with reason and move with emotion. Finally, he persuaded General Ji to return the tiger talisman. I was too lazy to pay attention to him and stood up on my own. I will go to the palace now and present it to my father. Whether you want to go with me or not is entirely up to you. Yes. Ji Wenchen was much more obedient this time. She lowered her head and followed me obediently into the palace. When the emperor saw the tiger talisman, I persuaded him again. The anger in my heart finally subsided a little. An imperial decree was issued to exempt the general of Jinshi from being transferred. That night, I finally let go of the worry that I had felt for Ji Shi for so many days. I wanted to relax for a while, so I asked Xia Yi to go to the wine cellar and get me some peach blossom wine that I had brewed myself. Then I poured myself a glass of wine in the yard facing the bright moon. In a drunken state, I noticed someone entering my room. Who? I narrowed my eyes. In the corner of my eye, I saw Ji Wenchen walking and wearing a white robe. Perhaps it was because although he was the son of a general, he had never actually received any military training. Every move he made exuded the aura of a nobleman. He looks quite handsome. I lazily raised another glass of wine to my lips. What are you doing here? Ji Wenchen looked a little embarrassed. Wenchen came here to thank the princess for saving Wenchen and the Ji family from dire straits. He took a deep breath and knelt on one knee. To repay the princess' kindness, if the princess wants Wenchen to do anything, Wenchen will not refuse. Look at the way he endures humiliation and bears heavy burdens. The alcohol was getting to me, and I couldn't help but close my eyes in intoxication. I reached out, grabbed his collar, and pulled him in front of me. Then, as you said this morning, come and serve me in my bed. 7. The expression on Ji Wenchen's face changed several times. He closed his eyes and stood up from the ground. Here. I smiled and put my hands around his neck. It's okay here. His face was bright red. Maybe I was too drunk. He couldn't help but turn his head away. His eyes were fixed elsewhere, not daring to look at me. Princess, why don't you go back to your room? It's not good here. I sneered. Ji Wenchen, didn't you say you would serve me in my bedroom? Seeing that his face was red all the way to his ears, I became playful and reached out to touch his earlobe. It's not the first time. Why are you shy? Ji Won-chun took a deep breath. Resigned to his fate, he nodded. Then it is, as the princess wishes. I released his neck. The interest in his eyes faded. I was just joking just now. A force melon is not sweet. You have Jingle in your heart, so I won't force you. I yawned. He walked towards the room without paying attention to himself. You can sleep in this yard if you want, or you can go back to your room if you want. I am tired today, so I will go to bed first. Ji Won-chun was left standing there dumbfounded.
8.
The emperor seemed to be afraid that Jingle would have any further contact with Ji Won-chun, so he began to urge the queen to choose a husband for Jingle. The queen was naturally pleased with this. After careful selection, 3 candidates were chosen for Jingle. On the day when the candidate was finalized, she specially summoned me into the palace. Those 3 gentlemen are all excellent candidates. They will come to the palace in a while. You are Jingle's sister, so you should help her. The queen held my hand affectionately. At the palace banquet that day, I stepped forward and resolved the crisis faced by the Hu family. That's why she became much closer to me. Even such an important matter as Jingle choosing a husband, he had to ask me to join him. However, the look in Jingle's eyes when he looked at me was not pleasant at all. Not only is it ugly, it's like he's mad as hell and wants to swallow me whole. Mother, why did you ask her to come? She is just a princess born out of wedlock to a noble family. Don't let her bring low status to your thingy palace. King Locke. The queen glared at her fiercely. Instead, it made her feel even more aggrieved. When the 3 princes came to pay homage to the queen, she sat with me behind the screen, looking unhappy. He turned and glared at me, gritting his teeth. Nangong Shu, are you happy now? You have Ah Chin by your side, but my mother wants to marry me off to someone random. Nangong Shu, I hate you so much. I looked at her almost enviously. How nice. The husbands chosen by the queen for her were all ambitious young men from noble families who had golden medals of immunity from death and whose family had inherited the throne from generation to generation. She also carefully examined the character and family style of the person. No matter which of the 3 she married, she would live a carefree and comfortable life with a considerate husband and kind parents-in-law. You don't have to be like me, standing by your husband's side and acting as your father's spy. She was always cautious, fearing that her father would suspect her, and she also had to endure the suspicion of her husband. I really envy her. She looked at me with an unnatural expression. Why are you looking at me like that? I smiled faintly and said, nothing else. I just want to tell my sister that the eldest son of the Ningen family looks elegant and handsome and seems to be a good candidate. The eldest son of Ning Rujin, used to be the 3rd prince's study companion. Tong Jingle is also familiar with him. So she snorted through her nose and nodded. You are right. Maybe it was because the queen had been persuading her for a long time, or maybe it was because of something her father said, but she seemed to have given up on Ji Won-chun. Finally, she nodded and let Ning Rujian be her husband. When I returned from the palace, Ji Won-chun appeared quietly at the door. His eyes were fixed on me like a hawk. Princess, the queen has summoned you to the palace today. What's the matter? His attitude towards me is much better now. They have all learned to use honorifics instead of calling me by my first name. I looked back at him without hesitation. I was asked to select Jingle's husband. I have already chosen the son of Lord Ningen as her consort. He staggered and almost lost his balance. He looked distraught, as if he had lost half his life. I didn't even look at him and walked past him into the princess's palace.
Whispered to Xia Yi.
Princess Jingle will be getting married in 6 months. Keep a close eye on him during these days. He must not do anything out of line.
9.
At night, I grinned and called up the summer. My old me pain problem has come back. When my mother had just passed away, no one was willing to adopt a powerless princess like me. I can only live in the princess's residence. The maids in the princess's palace are vicious, and they torture me in different ways every day. Perhaps because I had suffered too much in the past, I caught a cold at a young age. Every autumn, My knee hurts so much that I can't walk. I don't know why today, but my head started to hurt. Xia supported me and leaned on the couch to rest. Before I knew it, I fell into a deep sleep. This time I slept, I had nightmares again. In my dream, I returned to my childhood. The palace ladies gathered together and discussed how to entertain me. In the cold winter, they poured half a bucket of ice water on my head and pointed at me and laughed. What kind of princess is she if she doesn't have a mother? I squatted in the snow, hugged my body helplessly, and shivered. Several palace maids discussed quietly. You said, she is a princess after all. What if the emperor remembers her one day and causes trouble for us? How about we throw her into the well? Then we can say that she slipped and fell into the water and died. They dragged me, step by step, towards the well. I struggled desperately, crying and begging them. Maidens, please, I won't tell anyone. Please spare my life. But they turned a deaf ear. He pulled me and dragged me along the snow, laughing. What are you doing? In the distance, a strange voice was heard. My eyes suddenly widened. He is Master Ji, who lives in Sinang Palace. I am of humble status. My salary is often deducted, and I have never been allowed by my father to go to the study. So he had no choice but to hide behind the door and secretly listen to the teacher's lecture when the teacher was teaching. Ji Wenchen, however, received the favor of the Queen Mother and was able to go to the study every day together with other princes and princesses. I have seen him many times, so I know who he is. He was carrying a school bag and on his way to the study. From a distance, I saw the palace maids dragging me, dropping their school bags, and running towards me. Master Ji, Master Ji. My lips trembled, and I tightly grabbed the sleeve of the person in front of me. Please, please save me. Are you the little maid of the princess? I suddenly opened my eyes. Ji Wenchen was actually sitting beside my bed, holding a bowl of medicine. In shock, he accidentally knocked over the bowl of medicine in his hand.
10.
I gave him a cold look. He burrowed back into the quilt in a rather wolfish manner. Just pretend you didn't hear anything. I turned away angrily and didn't look at him. After a long time, I suddenly felt someone holding my hand. His voice was hoarse. Later, I went to the princess's house to look for you and brought you some food. But I didn't find you, and no one told me that you were the third princess. There was some sadness in my eyes, stubbornly holding back the tears in my eyes. The Empress Dowager showed me mercy and chose Anyang as my mother. I moved to Jiayan Palace. After Mother and passed away, I have been living in Jiayan Palace and have not returned to the princess residence. He helped me up dejectedly. I asked them to prepare another bowl of medicine. Drink it quickly. The doctor has come to check your pulse and said you have some old illnesses. This medicine is for your cold. You will feel much better after drinking it. I obediently took the medicine from him. He watched me drink it before leaving. After another 7 days, I finally felt better. Let Xia hold me and go to the backyard to bask in the sun. But unexpectedly, he ran into Ji Wenchen. He walked to my side and took over Xia Yi's support for me. I was tired, so I just let him go. He sat beside me in silence. After a long time, he spoke softly. So, when you helped me solve the problem in the palace that day, it was because of what happened that year. I nodded. When he opened his mouth, his breath was still a little weak. Ji Wenchen, I know you love Jingle wholeheartedly. But father will never let her marry you, and now her marriage to Master Ning has been decided.
He sighed softly.
After Jingle gets married, I will tell my father that I am tired of you and ask for an imperial decree of divorce to set you free. I'm here to protect you. But before that, could you please be quiet and stop causing me trouble? Ji Wenchen lowered his head, looking a little depressed. The arrogance and conceit that he had before seemed to have gradually left him. After a long time, he let out a long sigh. Yes. 11. Ever since we met in the backyard that day, Ji Wenchen appeared in my yard more and more frequently. Maybe I was afraid that he would do something out of line again, so I sent someone to keep an eye on him. He had nowhere to go, so he just came to bother me every day. I was sitting at the table, reading a military book. He sat aside and diligently moved the ice basin closer to me. When I was arranging flowers on the windowsill, he snatched the watering can from Xiaoyi's hand and insisted on watering my flowers. I was afraid that he would ruin the flowers, so I glared at him. He then withdrew his hand angrily. Maybe it's because the weather is gradually turning into autumn. My cold keeps coming back. Ji Wenchen stayed by my bedside every day and brought me medicine. I held my head and made a gesture to drive him away. Go back to your room. I see you have a headache. He looked at me differently.
No.
I will stay here to protect the princess. I had a splitting headache and yelled, I hate you. Why are you guarding me? He showed an expression that was neither smiling nor laughing. Some people always call out, Master Ji, in a high or low voice every night after they fall asleep. Could it be that the princess is dreaming about another man at night? My secrets were revealed. His face turned red unconsciously. You spied on me sleeping? He held up my coat for me and said with a smile, I'm just worried that the princess' knees will hurt again at night, so I won't leave until I see that the princess is sleeping soundly. His hand was on my sleeve. A warm feeling came. My heart skipped a beat. It seemed as if some thoughts that had long been extinguished were stirring in my heart. In fact, after going to Zhaoyan Palace, Empress and has no children, but she is quite considerate to me. For the first time, I had the dignity of a princess. One day, I finally mustered up the courage. I took the wind chime that I had spent 2 days and nights making by myself and went to wait for him at the door of the study. I wanted to tell him in person that the person he saved that day was not some little palace maid, but it was the third princess, Nangong Shu. I even thought of the first sentence I would say, Master Ji, can I get to know you again? But I stood there for a long time, and what I saw was him and Jingle walking out together, shoulder to shoulder. He looked at her with extremely gentle eyes. I almost ran away. I was afraid that he would see my ferocious appearance. In the end, I didn't give away the wind chime. Instead, I gave it to a young eunuch who went out of the palace to purchase goods and asked him to exchange it for 10 cents for me. I'm just an unloved princess. What's the point of wishing so much? It's not as real as money. At least, it will allow me to live a better life in the palace. Those inexplicable feelings that arose were strangled by me in their infancy. Ji Wenchen looked at me with inquiry in his eyes. Princess, did you save me just because you saved my life that year, or because you have feelings for me? 12. I have asked myself this question before. That day, I begged my father to grant me a marriage with him in public just to save Ji Wenchen. But don't I have any selfish motives? When my father issued an edict allowing me to marry him, did I feel the slightest bit of joy in my heart? The answer is yes. Seeing Ji Wenchen frowning, with strange emotions in his eyes. I am not a person who likes to hide. Simply put it bluntly, yes, I am pleased with you. But I know that you have Jingle in your heart. I have never asked for anything more. You just put your mind on me. On the wedding night, the wine was sent by someone in the palace. It was poisoned. I was not aware of it. It was just an accident. You don't have to. I said this. Ji Wenchen suddenly leaned over and kissed my lips. I was stunned. The blood in my body suddenly began to boil. There is a voice in my heart that is complaining. Nangong Shu, the one he likes is your younger sister Jingle. Not you. But this kiss came so unexpectedly. He kissed her again passionately. When his lips moved away, I felt a sense of loss. Princess, Wenchen wants to ask you something. From now on, Princess, are you willing to be a harmonious couple with Wenchen? He smiled brightly. I hesitated again and again. I know clearly that the person in front of me is smiling warmly at me. This is someone I never dare to fantasize about or touch. But now he reached out to me. At this moment, when I was young, the white moonlight was far away in the sky. It actually shone on me, who was dull and dim. I reached my hand out from my sleeve with trembling hands, tentatively, and slowly shook his hand back. Ji Wenchen, are you speaking from the heart? He smiled warmly. It's my true heart. At that moment, I accepted my fate. Resigned to her own obsession, she lost herself in a smile. Okay, I will forgive your past, but since you have provoked me, I just hope that you will never let me down again from now on. If there is any betrayal, he leaned forward. Don't worry, princess. Won-Shin will never let you down in this life. I could no longer restrain myself and let myself be immersed in this tenderness. 13. Half a year passed quickly. In a blink of an eye, it was Jingle's wedding day. Early in the morning, I considerately put on Ji Won-Shin's outer robe. You can just call in sick today and don't have to go with me. He shook his head and smiled at me tenderly. No, you don't have to worry about me doing anything out of the ordinary. Since I am committed to you, I will stay calm. I agreed, took him in the carriage, and headed to the princess's palace. He just as I promised, sitting quietly next to me the whole time. During the meal, he wanted to pour me some wine, but I held out my hand to stop him. No need. He laughed. It is my duty to pour wine for the princess. Princess, you don't have to pity me. I gave him a sidelong glance. I'm pregnant. Why should I drink alcohol? His eyes lit up with joy, and he couldn't help but hold my hand. The emperor summoned me a few days ago and said he wanted to send me to guard Hancheng, but I declined. I'm always worried about you being pregnant, so I have to stay by your side. I burst out laughing. Okay, if father has anything to blame you for, you can come find me. At that time, I was immersed in the joy of becoming a new mother. I didn't notice that there was something strange in his eyes when he looked at me. 14. During the dinner, when he was pouring wine for himself, he accidentally poured the wine on himself. Ah, Shu, can you allow me to change clothes? I was chatting with the fourth princess, and I didn't even raise my eyes when I heard this. Well, go ahead. The fourth sister Jingrong was full of envy. Look at the way the third prince looks. He is really considerate to the princess.
Ismilet.
Even when the auspicious time chosen by the queen for Jingle arrived, the wedding carriage still hadn't arrived. I had a bad feeling in my heart. When I turned around, I saw that Ji Won-Shin still hadn't come back. Alarm bells immediately went off in my heart. For no reason, I recalled the day when I brought Ji Won-Shin back home. He disappeared behind me in the same way. Soon, he was discovered having a secret meeting with Jingle in the Imperial Garden. At this time, a eunuch ran into the princess's mansion in a panic and whispered to the queen who was sitting on a high place. The queen's face turned pale instantly. Mother, what's wrong? I knew something was wrong and hurried to the queen's side. The queen was holding her head up and rubbing her eyebrows vigorously. When he saw me, he was furious and slapped me hard. I was unsteady for a moment and fell to my knees.
Bitch.
He is indeed born to a bitch. He can't even take care of his own husband. She pointed at me with her long armored hand, trembling. Jingle was kidnapped by Ji Won-Shin. The maidservant beside her has confessed that Ji Won-Shin had planned with her long ago to take her away from the capital on the day she left the palace for her wedding. It's over. Jingle is over. The Hu family is over too. She was filled with anger and resentment. Still not satisfied, he stretched out his foot and kicked me hard. You bastard, it's all your fault. You're a good-for-nothing. I gave you a love wine in vain, hoping to bring you up with Ji Won-Shin. I collapsed to the ground. Let her vent her anger on me. My head was buzzing. What she just said kept echoing in my mind. Jingle was kidnapped by Ji Won-Shin. It turned out that he had suddenly changed in the past few months. All his tenderness and affection towards me was fake. I laughed out loud at myself. It is a waste of my intelligence throughout my life. When the time came, I was actually moved by his methods. Relaxed supervision on him. These 6 months have been the days of harmonious living with me. He was actually looking for various ways to plan this elopement with Jingle. Ji Won-Shin, you have such a cruel heart. 15. I knelt on the cold ground of Changming Palace again. The old knee problem seems to have recurred. Again and again, the pain pierced my heart. My father stared at me coldly. He picked up an inkstone beside him and threw it at me. I dare not hide away. The inkstone hit me on the forehead. Blood flowed down the hair, emitting a slight fishy smell. But I didn't bother to care about the princess's dignity and kowtowed again and again. Father, this is all my fault. General G has no intention of rebelling, and Jingle is just trapped by love. It has nothing to do with who. It's all because of the useless son and minister who can't take good care of his husband. Please give me another chance. I will teach him a lesson this time. Ji Wenchen and Jingle couldn't run far. They were captured in a dense forest on the outskirts of the city by soldiers sent by my father. At the moment, Jingle has been captured and confined to Fingi Palace. Ji Wenchen was not so lucky, has been sent to prison. I don't know whether my father punished him. It's just a hunch that if my father ordered him to be punished, he would probably not have a good ending. Sure, I am very disappointed in you.
He sighed.
But you are my daughter after all. I won't punish you too harshly. To prevent him from getting you into trouble, I will issue an order to allow you to divorce that guy. Father, I looked up in disbelief. He made a huge mistake by seducing the princess to elope with him. In order to protect his family, the only way for General G is to abandon him and sever ties with him. By then, without the protection of his status as a royal concubine, his life would probably be in danger. I gritted my teeth. Father, I am pregnant with his child. You can't bear to let your grandson be born without a father, right? Both of my mothers died young. Do you really want me to be without anyone close to me? I don't know how long it was before I heard him sigh softly. That's it. Sure, since you are determined to protect him, I will do as you wish. It's just that you have to bear some of his crimes together with him. Is it worth it for such a treacherous person? Is it worth it? I vaguely remembered that in the snow, he held my hand tightly. At that time, he saved me once. Now I deserve to kill him. With tears in my eyes, I kowtowed to my father firmly. Thank you, Father, for your help.
16.
My father issued an edict to strip me of my princess title and demote me to the Lord of Shuanqing County. I also personally brought the imperial edict to pardon him and went to the inner prison to bring him out. His body was covered with marks of torture. He fell limply on the straw. When he saw someone coming, his eyes lit up suddenly. After seeing me clearly, the light suddenly went out. Why you? The disappointment on his face was too obvious. My heart felt like it was being cut by a knife, and I felt a dense and dull pain. But he pretended to be indifferent. Father has said that your sins will be forgiven. But from now on, you and Jingle are not allowed to meet each other. He followed me with his head down and left the palace. Still couldn't help it, hesitantly said. Nangong Shu, how is Jingle? Although I knew long ago that his kindness and gentleness during those days were just an act. But when I really saw that his eyes were full of Jingle, I couldn't help but my eyes welled up. Don't worry, Jingle is fine. The queen said that her wedding date has to be postponed, and she needs to control her temper in the palace. He responded in a low voice. When I reached the palace gate, I stopped. He said in a muffled voice, "Is it possible for Jingle and I to be together anymore? Nangong Shu, will I never be able to escape from your clutches from now on?" I chuckled. No. After saying this, she took out the divorce letter from her sleeve and gave it to him. From now on, you have nothing to do with me anymore. You are free. So, I called for the carriage. Looking back, Ji Wenchen was standing there in a daze, holding the divorce letter. He suddenly raised his head and looked at me with some surprise in his eyes. You really want to divorce me? I gave him a relieved smile. Ji Wenchen, I have paid off what I owe you. From now on, the mountains are high and the waters are far, and we will never meet again. Having said that, I prepared to get on the carriage. I have to go back to the princess's house to pack my bags. Now, I am no longer the third princess, so I cannot stay in the capital. On a chosen day, I will go to my fiefdom to look for the city. Suddenly, a pair of hands grabbed my sleeves. Ji Wenchen opened his mouth slightly and looked at me in disbelief. Nangong Shu, you actually let me go so easily? Your feelings for me are also fake, right? As he spoke, he actually became a little flustered. Oh, and the baby in your belly. You cannot divorce me. The child in your womb cannot be without a father. When he mentioned his children, he felt as if he had taken a reassurance pill. He breathed a sigh of relief and murmured, "Oh, and there are children." He raised his head, his old conceited look reappearing. "For the sake of the child, I will go back with you and continue to be your concubine." 17. He looked confident, as if I would definitely agree to him. But the anxiety in his eyes and the slightly trembling hands when he pulled me revealed the nervousness in his heart. "Child." I tried hard to hold back the tears in my eyes. Give a mocking smile. "The child is long gone." At the chaotic and hastily concluded banquet that was originally prepared for Jingle's wedding, when the queen kicked me hard, I felt a warm current flowing through my body. On the way back home, her dress was already soaked with blood. Not long after I arrived at the mansion, the child left me. I had clearly told him that I was pregnant before he eloped with Jingle. He still did not change his plan. This is enough to prove that he doesn't have this child or me in his heart. It's better to have no child. There is no point in staying. I glanced at his surprised expression. He wiped his eyes, turned around, and got on the carriage. He seemed to react. Suddenly, he came over and hugged me from behind. "Nangong Shu, you are not allowed to leave." There was a slight hint of crying in his voice. This was the first time he spoke to me in such a humble manner. I'm wrong, okay?" His voice was full of helplessness. "My father has removed me from the family tree, the queen mother died early, and Jingle doesn't want to see me. I have nowhere to go now. Can you forgive me for once, Ashu?" I slowly pried open the 10 fingers he had crossed in front of my stomach, until I pushed him away. "It's too late." I got on the carriage without any hesitation. I let him stand behind me, calling my name in despair. I slowly closed my eyes. I held back the tears that were about to fall. "I also wanted to grow old with you. But spring is gone. From now on, the mountains will be high, and the rivers will be long. I only hope that I will never meet you again." End of extras. Extra looking for the city. Xuanqing is a beautiful place. After Nangong Shu settled down in Xuanqing, she felt much happier every day. My old rheumatism also got much better. She reads books and arranges flowers every day, and her life is very leisurely. I always feel that living like this here is much better than being a princess in the palace. She said this to Xia Yi. She originally hoped to live a comfortable life. Now, even though she was nominally rebuked, she actually liked Sun Qing very much. It can be considered a blessing in disguise. I heard that a storyteller came to the city. Originally, she was not famous, but I heard that he was telling the story of her, the county lord. Someone then passed the words to Nangong Shu's ears. One afternoon, Nangong Shu was bored, so she took Xia Yi to the tea house. But she didn't expect that as soon as the storyteller came out, she stood up with a cold face. "Ashu, Ashu." The people on the street stared at the man in amazement and chased the county lord for half a mile. In the end, he actually caught up with him. "Ashu." Someone nearby sighed. "This man is really brave. He even dares to use the name of the county lord." He ran up to Nangong Shu and pulled her sleeve. "Ah, Shu, I finally found you." Nangong Shu coldly let go of his hand. Looking into his eyes, there was only indifference. "You should leave now. Xuanqing is not the place for you." After returning home that night, Nangong Shu's headache, which had not occurred for a long time, recurred. She said to Xia Yi, "Perhaps I should have let my father kill him at the beginning so that he wouldn't stick to me like a dogskin plaster." Xuanqing was a bit remote, and the best doctors were helpless against her headache. "County Lord, you just need to relax, and this headache will heal." Nangong Shu had no choice but to prop up her head and lean on the bed all night. After an unknown amount of time, she suddenly felt someone's hand rubbing a certain spot on her head. After rubbing for a long time, the pain finally eased a little. "Xia Yi, when did you learn this?" Nangong Shu closed her eyes, and her tightly furrowed brows relaxed a little. That familiar dull voice came from above her head. "I learned this from the doctors in the army when I was working in the barracks." She opened her eyes suddenly. The person in front of him was Ji Wenchen. However, he no longer has the sharpness he once had. On the contrary, it has become much softer. He looked at her eyes and eyebrows, which were filled with even more tenderness. Nan Gongshu screamed. Who put him in there? Xia Yi came in hurriedly. County Lord, I was sleepy and accidentally let someone climb over the wall and sneak in. On the second day, Ji Wenchen, who had been driven out, was taking a nap leaning against the wall of the county mansion. Xia Yi threw a purse to him from a distance. The county lord said this is a reward for you. If you know what's good for you, leave Xuanqing as soon as possible. Ji Wenchen looked at the silver in his hand and smiled bitterly. Although his father severed ties with him, he could not bear to see his son suffer. He found a job for him in a military camp outside the capital. Once, when he was drinking in a tavern, he met Jingle, who was already married. Jingle was both a princess and the young lady of the Ningen mansion, so naturally she was surrounded by people and was extremely noble. On the contrary, he, a commoner, looked extremely down and out. Jingle is much more stable than before. Every gesture and movement is graceful and elegant. She even made the story of her elopement with him a joke. Ji Wenchen didn't care. He just racked his brains and tried every means to get her to talk about Nan Gongshu. Jingle sighed, understood his awkward thoughts, and told him everything that happened that year. Only then did he realize how much Nan Gongshu had paid in order to protect his life. Not only was her position as princess deposed, she was also driven out of the capital. Her child was gone, but she told the emperor that the child in her belly could not be without a father, and she used this as a threat just to save his life. When the time came, she still remembered the promise she had made. She knew that he stayed with her unwillingly, so she gave him a divorce letter and set him free. She suffered so much injustice, but she said nothing to him. Jingle finished speaking and looked at him dejectedly. Brother Wenchen, we were too ignorant in the past. Let's just pretend those ridiculous past events never happened. The queen has you in her heart. Go find her. She paused, tears welling in her eyes. If you find her, you must make amends to her and say sorry to her on my behalf. He walked out of the tavern, feeling only sorrow in his heart. How he had broken her heart. That's why she, whose heart and eyes were filled with only him, left so decisively. He also knew that she owed him nothing, but he still owed her something. He also understood that she didn't want to have anything to do with him anymore. I just want to be far away from him, never to meet him again. But she hasn't asked him yet, is he willing? He owed her too much. He once said that he would never fall in love with her in his life. But he broke his promise. He began to want to have something happen with her urgently. Before he could pay off what he owed her, he would even sacrifice his life. Ji Wenchen thought that he would not give up. Dripping water wears away a stone. He will always stay by her side. One day, she would forgive him. Of course I will. End of article.